97.3 ESPN.com, Eagles insider John McMullen. National columnist, FanRag Sports, NFL. We got a lot of stuff to dive into as we get closer to draft time, but some NFL stuff on the docket here, John, as the interesting thing is the draft, you start to hear the fake news now, right? That's a very popular word in this time of the news cycle. The fake news out there. I would have to surmise that Mitchell Trubisky being a thought at number one, please tell me that would be fake news.
I don't think it is fake news. I really don't. And I've talked about it on this show, really dating back to the Combine. I said eventually one or two of these quarterbacks are going to start going up the board. It happens every year. And I believe it's going to happen this year. Whether that ends up
the board and number one are two different things.
Yeah, not necessarily number one, but we've seen it last year. I'll just say this. If you don't have to go back far to look at Jared Goff, number one, Carson Wentz, number two. And if you look at that objectively and look at the three players behind those two quarterbacks, Joey Bosa, Ezekiel Elliott, Jalen Ramsey. Well, there's no way. There is absolutely no way that Jared Goff or Carson Wentz are better football players than those three. There just isn't. But the position is valued so much, and correctly so, by the way, that intrinsic value at that position pushes those guys up the board. And I think the same thing's going to happen to Trubisky. I'm not going to say he's going to go number one, but it wouldn't shock me at all.
Is he even worth taking at number 12? Which is where the Browns have another pick.
Think of it this way, Mike. If Myles Garrett, who I think is as advertised, I think he's a tremendous prospect. I'm not trying to downgrade him. But if he turns into a Hall of Fame level pass rusher, Hall of Fame, which is unlikely, even to a guy that talented, versus a 10-year top-tier starter at the quarterback position, what would you rather have? It's not close.
Right. There's no question.
So if you are the Cleveland Browns and you believe Mitchell Trubisky is a top-tier starting quarterback in this league eventually, you almost have to take him at number one, because you can't count on the fact with San Francisco and Chicago and the Jets and the Bills in between you and 12, you can't count on him being there at 12. And I would guarantee he's not going to be there at 12.
No, I certainly get that point of view. It just seems that universally speaking, there are many people out there that believe that there is not a first-round talent in this draft, and it seems that every year that all these teams chase a ghost that doesn't exist, finding their Tom Brady or Aaron Rodgers. And these guys, there's only a handful of guys who can play quarterback in this league for a reason. They're not easy to find.
I don't.
And they're typically not just playing one season at friggin' North Carolina.
Yeah. I think a lot of ways the top quarterbacks in this draft, not only Trubisky, but Deshaun Watson, Patrick Mahomes, Deshaun Kaiser, I think a lot of them are paying for Jared Goff. I really do. Because every single one, I don't want to hear these guys aren't first-round talents, because they all are. All four of those guys are. And I would argue all four of them have higher ceilings than Jared Goff. But he was such an abject disaster as the number one overall pick last season that people are looking at, and there's a hangover to that. And if you're asking me, is Trubisky better than Goff? My answer to that is yes. So if he deserved to go number one overall, why not Mitchell Trubisky?
Okay, as John McMullen writes at FanRag Sports NFL, the Browns should be serious about drafting a quarterback number one. Should that quarterback be Mitch Trubisky? Is there a better option than Mitchell Trubisky? Don't shortchange him by calling him Mitch.
I can, yeah, I know.
Guy named Mitch has a mustache. Mitchell does not.
Yeah. that, it's the same thing with, we have to get used to saying Tim Jernigan now instead of Timmy Jernigan.
Yeah. Timmy's clean cut. Timmy is clean cut. Tim can have a gold-plated mouth. Teeth. Yeah, exactly. If your name's Timmy, you can't have gold-plated mouth. Timmy is clean cut. Tim can have gold-plated mouth and maybe a goatee.
Yeah, it's Deshaun Watson. I have some concerns over his size. Deshaun Kaiser, I think physically, and I talked about it, I think has the highest ceiling, but I don't think he's ready to play right away. And Patrick Mahomes, as far as, we talk about guys going up the board. He's visiting with the Jets this week. It wouldn't stun me if he won 6th overall. That's how desperate these teams are. And that's how quickly these guys rise. And people have compared his arm strength to Brett Favre. He's got a tremendous, tremendous arm. But he played in that horrific college system, which is very difficult to translate. So it's tough. I get it. But when you're Cleveland and you're coming off a season where you traded out saying we don't want Carson Wentz because we don't think he's going to be a top-tier quarterback, and we think this class is better. And then all of a sudden you get to this class and you're saying the same thing. Well, this guy can't do that. This guy can't do this. Everybody's got warts. At some point, you have to have confidence in your player development. The Cleveland Browns need a quarterback, whether it ends up being Trubisky at 1. Or hey, Deshaun Kaiser at 12, or somebody of that nature, or trading for Jimmy Garoppolo or A.J. McCarron. They have to get a quarterback.
Yeah, but okay, many teams, I feel, John, chase the ghost of getting this quarterback and neglect the rest of their team in this never-ending search for a guy that doesn't exist, and then it just deflates the rest of the team where they could get maybe a top-level defense and then find, a good but yet not great quarterback who has a great defense. And that, you know what I mean? Like, I feel like the Browns among other teams.
I point to the opposite. I always point to the opposite. And to me, the two greatest offensive and defensive players in the recent past, J.J. Watt defensively in Houston. What has that accomplished for Houston? 3-time Defensive Player of the Year. And then Adrian Peterson in Minnesota. MVP, I would argue that MVP year of his was just unbelievable. Getting the Vikings to the playoffs with Christian Ponder as the quarterback. But what does it give you? It certainly doesn't give you consistency to win in this league. Mm-hmm. There's no, as good as Myles Garrett is, and could be, there's no chance he's going to be as good as J.J. Watt. None. Zero. And what has that really done?
Well, you put it like that. When you put it like that, it does sound right. But I'm not talking about having J.J. Watt in a top-level defense and T.J. Yates. I'm talking about having a guy who's serviceable. A guy who's...
And that's the thing. You can either have it's obviously everybody wants Tom Brady, everybody wants Aaron Rodgers, and you're right. It's very, very difficult to find that type of quarterback. And then you can win a different way and sort of build up the team around a serviceable guy. Brad Johnson is the example everybody gives. But what you don't have and what you're looking for is consistency, because the more times you're winning 10, 11 games, obviously the more opportunities you have a chance to make a run at the Super Bowl. And the truly great quarterbacks, Peyton Manning, perfect example. Yeah, he only won 2, but you're winning. You were basically in Peyton's prime. You were guaranteed 11 wins. 11 wins was a bad season. And then you sort of went up from there. Are you going to win 12? Or 13.
Right. I guess the flip side is, like, I'm talking about, like, if look, you're right. I'm not saying that you're wrong in this instance. It's just frustrating sometimes if you're a fan of the Cleveland Browns or any team that's chasing quarterback. But the alternative is you're the Kansas City Chiefs, and you're very good, and you have Alex Smith, and then you lose in the first or second round. I certainly get that. Like, if you put Alex Smith on the Houston Texans, are they winning the Super Bowl?
No, but, they probably make the playoffs. They might even win a playoff game here and there. But they're probably not going to win the Super Bowl.
Right, so it goes back. The NFL, John, so our conversation really comes back to is that the NFL is becoming the NBA. If you don't have a superstar at quarterback, you ain't winning.
Yeah, you're certainly not going to win consistently. I mean, you can have that season.
Right.
Where you can sort of...
The Baltimore Ravens with their defense have become the bad boy Pistons, virtually. I mean, that's what it comes down to. It's like the teams that win that don't have Brady or Rodgers or one of those quarterbacks are, these exception teams, and basically you have to have the top-level quarterback or you're virtually the asterisks now.
Yeah, and I think it's, in a lot of ways, a lot of the rule changes have kind of fostered that environment. I don't necessarily like it, and I'd prefer if you could build teams in different ways. I think it would make the sport more interesting. I think it would make everybody more engaged. But, yeah, I mean, the reality is in today's NFL, if you don't have that top-tier quarterback, you're not going to win consistently. And that's why everyone does reach. And there's no question, if you're rating football players, just like last year what I brought up with Bosa and Elliott and Ramsey, if you're rating football players, Trubisky and Watson aren't going to be 1-2. They're not. I'm not arguing that. But because of the value of the position, if they're going to be good, you almost have to take them in those first two spots if you're Cleveland and San Francisco, because you're getting Myles Garrett, you're getting maybe Solomon Thomas, really good defensive linemen. But what is that going to do for your team long term versus having a really good quarterback? And that's the quandary these types of teams are in. You'd love to have the Andrew Luck prospect or the Peyton Manning prospect, or more recently the Jameis Winston prospect, but they don't come around every year.
Nope, and I think it's a very interesting crossroads the NFL is hitting right now, where they are becoming the NBA in that if you don't have a quarterback, your team really is the 6th seed in the NBA that hopes to win a playoff round.
Yeah, I think, there's a little more room.
Yes, a little more room. Little more. A little more because there's less. There's more. There's more quarterbacks, I guess, that have the ability to win playoff games than there are superstars in the NBA to carry a team through a playoff round, maybe.
Yeah, and it is easier in a one-and-done environment to sort of have a lights-out game. In another fashion, you might have, the Giants proved it with a great defensive line recently. You might have, on any given day, you might have a kick return for a touchdown, a pick six that puts you over the top. So I think there is a little bit more room for those rare runs. But again, the consistency is not going to be there. The consistency is only going to be there with a great quarterback. And I do think that's sort of kind of NBA light. And I do think it's a problem for the league because it makes it less entertaining.
I agree that, and because and the one thing that's different in the NFL, you don't see the tanking, you don't see teams that, value losing because the draft is so much more plentiful in the NFL that having the number 1 overall pick isn't a huge upgrade over the team that has the 7th or 8th or 10th pick. You don't see that issue, but what you're starting to see is that teams are willing to reach on a quarterback in hopes that guy becomes the game changer, even if it means if he's not, your season is a disaster, as opposed to adding more of a sure thing.
Yeah, and I think this year's a perfect example because if, for argument's sake, Cleveland does take Trubisky at number 1, and you get Kaiser or even Davis Webb in the second round, early second round, you might end up having the better quarterback long term. I think it's up to coaching and player development and how an organization handles a particular prospect. And I could certainly see that unveiling itself in the coming years. So, but for Cleveland specifically, there's such desperation. It's 1999 since the reboot of that franchise. They haven't had anything at that position. 1 year, basically, Derek Anderson was okay, and they thought they might have had something. And that's basically it. And they keep kicking the can down the road. They keep pushing it off. They said they had the answer last year. They had it. It was staring them in the face, and they turned it down. And that was Carson Wentz. And now to do it again, I don't know, because as we look forward, there's the kid from USC, but everybody's going to start poking holes. The college game, because of how they play it and the proliferation of spread offenses, you're not going to see finished products. So this is going to be the same narrative every single year, that this guy isn't ready, this guy isn't ready. None of them are ready, but you got to get them up to speed. And if Trubisky's going to be better than everybody else in 5 years, well, then that's got to be your pick.
Yeah. Derek Anderson, the Ryan Fitzpatrick of his time, right? He was Ryan Fitzpatrick before Ryan Fitzpatrick was Ryan Fitzpatrick. Talking with John McMullen here, 97.3 ESPN.com. A couple of players. We're getting to that stage where the draft is getting close. Guys who we thought could be traded are still on teams. I want to get your opinion of whether these guys will stay on their teams or not. Garoppolo, will he be a Pat?
Well, it's an interesting conversation to have if you're New England, because Tom Brady's 40 years old. I mean, as good as he's been, and we expect, there's no reason to believe he won't be as good as he normally is next season. But the injury can come at any time. The wheels can come off, and they have Garoppolo for one more season at a very reasonable rate. And if they do play it out and say Tom does get hurt, then they can move forward with him as the potential heir apparent. But if Tom Brady's going to play 6 more years, as Robert Kraft hopes, why in the heck are you going to keep Jimmy Garoppolo when you could spin him off and get a first-round pick, whether it's number 12 overall or something else? Because otherwise you're going to lose him for nothing. So I think that continues to be the most interesting decision an organization has to make. And I think at some point, if Cleveland isn't sold on Mitchell Trubisky at number 1, I would be hard-pressed if I'm the New England Patriots to turn down the 12th pick in the draft for Jimmy Garoppolo.
Kirk Cousins.
Yeah, I mean, I think he's going to play out the year under the franchise tender, make $24 million, and then reassess. And if he doesn't like what's going on in Washington, and let's be honest, he's probably not going to. If he did like it, he would have signed a long-term deal. And he's going to go out and reunite with Kyle Shanahan. But that also, you have to take a look at San Francisco at number 2. Because are they willing to be patient and wait for that and go through a year of Brian Hoyer playing the quarterback position? Or are they going to take Deshaun Watson or Mitch Trubisky at number 2 overall? So I think you have to see all these sort of dominoes have to fall. If San Francisco stays status quo, picks a defensive lineman, goes with Hoyer, I think that gives you a clear indication they think Kirk Cousins is coming there next year.
What about Osweiler? Can the Browns spin him off?
I don't think so.
Is there another Sam Hinkie in the NFL?
Certainly nobody's going to pick him up as a salary dump. I mean, I ultimately think they're going to release him, and I'm not going to say he's not going to find another job as a second stringer because there's such a dearth of quarterbacks in this league. But I can't imagine anyone's going to trade for him with that contract. The only team that would is Cleveland, and because they were willing to absorb the salary in a Sam Hinkie-like fashion. There's no other team that would do that.
What about Josh Gordon? What's his deal?
Well, Josh Gordon is obviously a tremendously talented receiver that arguably was the best receiver in football, and he can't stay on the field because of substance abuse issues. And the Browns have kind of hemmed and hawed. At one point, they said after the last suspension that they were going to move on, and now they're saying they're not so sure. Look, no one's going to give up anything of value for Josh Gordon simply because you can't count on him to stay on the field. Would he fit in? Insert name, Philadelphia and every other NFL team on the planet? Yes, he's tremendous talent-wise. Although he also hasn't played football for a really long time, so you have to add that into the equation. But the bottom line from a front office perspective is it doesn't matter how good he is if he can't be on the field. And to this point, he hasn't proven that he can stay on the field.
Right.
So the Browns are never going to get anything of value for him.
This story is a little interesting. I don't know what's going to come of it, but the city of St. Louis is suing the NFL and the 32 teams over the Rams relocating to L.A. They don't want the Rams back. No thank you on that. We just want to be paid for all the loss of wages and money that has happened to our town.
Yeah, Los Angeles is trying to send it back. No, that's not true. But, yeah, it's funny. I was talking to Josh a little bit off air about this. It's funny. You know, they're arguing it's not that big of a deal when the team's on the verge of moving. I'm talking about politicians that say it doesn't add anything to the local economy. Then after they're gone, they're like, oh, crap, we enjoyed this little bump we got on game days and what an NFL team means. So I don't see – St. Louis doesn't have a leg to stand on. You could argue, and it's true, Stan Kroenke in the end had no interest in staying in St. Louis, but you can also go back 10 years when they're trying to get something done, and St. Louis did nothing but drag their feet. So I don't think it's any more than a sort of grandstanding and trying to make the locals happy, as politicians are wont to do. And they constantly always do that. They kick the can down the road, and they would say, we're not going to deal with this. Let's let the next administration deal with it. And then when something happens and they actually leave, and they're like, oh, we didn't want that to happen. And now they gotta go other avenues. And again, it's just grandstanding.
John McMullen, every day with your NFL news and notes. Check him out on Twitter at JF_McMullen. He writes that the Browns should be a serious contender at drafting a quarterback at number 1 overall. He also writes about former Eagles executive Tom Modrak at our website, 973ESPN.com, who passed away at the age of 74. Check those 2 stories out and follow him on Twitter at JF_McMullen. John, we'll spar again tomorrow.
All right. Thank you, Mike.